A mutable object can be changed after it's created, and a immutable object cannot. Now I won't tell you when you should use immutable versus mutable objects, but I will show you the differences and how they work. So with that knowledge, you will be more confident on when you should use immutable versus mutable objects in your own applications. We are going to look on how we can use StateNotifier for creating immutable states, while also comparing it to ValueNotifier for creating mutable states. At the end of this video, you will have a strong foundation on how you can use StateNotifier. If you like these videos, make sure to subscribe to the channel, check out the newsletter, and let's get into it. I've gone ahead and created a new application, removing the initial homepage and just replaced it with a new homepage, which is a stateless widget. So to understand the fundamentals first, we will start with explaining a mutable object and how that can be used with a ValueNotifier. Starting off by creating a new class. This will be just a dog class containing two properties, the first one being the name and the second one being the age. Of course, we will add a simple constructor for this. Now this dog class will actually represent the state. Now going ahead and creating the ValueNotifier, we will give it the name dog ValueNotifier just to make it more simple. And this will extend the ValueNotifier. A ValueNotifier holds a single value, so in this case we will going to have the value of dog, so we will set the type to dog. Now we can implement the constructor, which also comes with the supercall. We'll replace value in these cases to dog just to make it more readable. And inside this class we're going to define a single method. The method's responsibility will be to actually increment the age, so we'll give it a name to something like birthday. Now to access the actual value, we will just call value because that will be the dog object. Now we can access the age of that dog object and just increment that age. Now the usage is actually very simple. We will create a new instance of this dog ValueNotifier with a name to something like dog ValueNotifier in this case. Now as defined in the constructor, we actually need to pass a dog object, so we're going to create a new constructor. This constructor will just simplify creating a dog object, so we don't have to pass a age and a name every time. We will give the name initial to the name constructor, and then just initialize the name to something like spot and then the age to 12. Now if we go to the dog ValueNotifier, we can simply pass in a dog.initial to just create a new dog for that ValueNotifier. So before we actually display the value, we are going to create a button. And when that button is pressed, we will call the birthday method. And as we're not passing anything to this method, we can actually remove the anonymous function expression. Now we can wrap the text, and we're going to wrap it in a stream builder just to make the implementation easier. And instead of a stream, we're going to have a value listenable instead. Now the type for this value listenable builder is actually the dog, coming from the dog ValueNotifier. And the value listenable in this case is the dog notifier. Then we just define the builder, which will have the context, value, and child. The value here will actually be the dog itself, so we can rename that to something like dog. Now inside here we can return a text and just string interpolate the dog's age inside there. Now all of this is fine. The main problem we have now is that we don't actually need to call the method, because we can just reference the value and then take the age and just increment that by 1. Of course, here you have to make an anonymous function to make it work. And here we have one of the problems with mutable objects. And it's that we can change the value anywhere where we have access to the object. Now we have the foundation for a ValueNotifier and mutable objects. So let's move on to StateNotifier and immutable objects. We will start off by creating a new immutable class. This will be the dog class, just that we make it immutable instead. So we will rename it to immutable dog and change the constructors. Now what we would like to do is actually make the fields final. And one way to enforce this is to actually make the class have an annotation called immutable. This will pretty much warn us if we don't have the fields as final. Now there are a lot of different packages that can make classes immutable, but here we will go with the simplest implementation. When handling immutable objects, we can't simply just change the variables such as the name or age, but instead we copy that current object and assign it new values and then reassign that object instead. So in that case, this copy with function will be very handy. In this class we will have two parameters, one for the name and one for the age. And then for returning, we just return a new instance of immutable dog. Now to make this a little bit more readable, we'll make the constructor parameters named instead. That way when we return a new object, we can just say name and what we're going to assign it to. And we're going to assign it to the name that we get passed in. And if that is null, i.e. we haven't passed any name, we'll just set it to the current name of that object. We will do the same for the age. So if we pass a age, that age will be set. And if we haven't passed an age, it will be the one it had before. And that is actually all you have to do to implement the copy with method. Now the next step is actually going to the pubspec YAML and adding the Flutter StateNotifier package. This package actually comes with some extra widgets that we can use compared to the normal StateNotifier version. So the next step is just copy the ValueNotifier class that we created and creating a StateNotifier version of it. To begin with, we will just rename it and make it extend the StateNotifier class. Now the first thing we will see is that value is underlined as red. The reason for this is because StateNotifier is a re-implementation of ValueNotifier, so StateNotifier instead has state as the value. So if we access this.state instead, we should get the dog object. We can also see it has some other handy methods such as the stream one. But in this case we will just use state. Now this state is the dog, so we can access the name or the age. And here we will notice that we can actually increment this age by 1. The reason for this is because we have to use our new class. So instead of using the dog class, we will use the immutable dog. And right off the bat, you can see that age can't now be mutated. So the way now we actually change the state is just assigning the state to a new version of our current state. So the first thing we do is just access the state object again. Now we can use the copy with method. And here we can assign a new value to one of these. We will take the age in this case. And as we want to increment it by 1, we can access the state age again and then just do +1. So the name in this case will be the same. The only difference is that we will have the age and then +1 on top of that. Now that primarily shows the immutable object usage. So now first let's look at some of the drawbacks of using a normal value notifier compared to a state notifier. So here we can see that we're just incrementing the age, but this could be fixed with a normal immutable object. But if we look at the value in particular, we can see that it doesn't care that we can reassign this value to something completely different. So here you can see me from the widget tree or a callback method, just being able to reset the whole state of that dog notifier. Now let's look at the state notifier example. We'll copy this value notifier and just renaming it and changing the type to a state notifier instead. Of course, the initial state has to be a immutable dog, so we use that instead. Now instead of the normal value listenable builder, we're using the state notifier builder coming from the package instead. We assign the state notifier to our current state notifier. And now if we go back to the method or the onPressed call, we change it to the state notifier instead. And now you can see that the value is red, so we change it to state, and that is actually giving us a compile warning or error. This makes it so we can't actually reset the state from outside, and as we're using a immutable value, we can't change the actual state values. This forces us to actually change the state from within the state notifier instead. So to now actually change the age, we just call our birthday method, which was the actual reason why we created it. Hopefully you found some value in this video. Make sure to sign up to the website for the newsletter in case you want to have a chance to win future courses, as well as considering supporting me on Patreon. And why not? Maybe just check out some of the other videos coming up here. And I will see you in the next one.